A major turning point in the war was what became known as the Tet Offensive, which was launched during the Vietnamese New Year. Tet refers to the Vietnamese New Year. And much like here in the United States, when it's New Year's, many people like to go to big cities and to celebrate, whether that meant going to Las Vegas or going to San Francisco or on the East Coast. New York City, of course, is huge. Many people like to celebrate in the cities, and well, the Vietnamese New Year is a longer festivity than just a New Year's Eve celebration like we have here, but still, it's not uncommon for people to come in from the countryside to celebrate New Year's. And so that's what happens during the festivities of Tet. Now the thing is you remember that the Viet Cong tended to blend in with the locals. They didn't look different than the other South Vietnamese. They didn't stand out. So when large numbers started coming into South Vietnamese cities prior to the festivities of Tet, it didn't attract attention. This was not an uncommon occurrence. But they launched this offensive. This was a coordinated attack launched by the NVA and the Viet Cong. All in all, 100 South Vietnamese cities and towns were attacked. And it took the Americans 3 months to get the upper hand. One of the major battles associated with the Tet Offensive was the Battle for Hue, which was the ancient capital. 142 Marines and 384 South Vietnamese were killed in over 24 days. The North Vietnamese losses were 8,000. And here's a quote from a Marine private named John Moore, who said, "I dove over a wall after crossing a street a couple of times. Cement chips and branches flew everywhere. It was so bad we couldn't even pop our head up and fire." One of the other major battles associated with Tet was the battle for Khe Sanh, which was a U.S. air base in North Vietnam, and it was surrounded and being attacked from all sides. Ultimately, we were able to protect Khe Sanh, but it was not easy. Khe Sanh actually sits really pretty much right up along the 17th parallel, just south of the border separating North and South Vietnam. Now the effects of the Tet Offensive really tie into the home front in 1968, because many Americans were divided over the war. Americans could be divided for the most part into two groups. There were the hawks that supported the war, and the doves that were opposed to the war in Vietnam. And the Tet Offensive only divided things even more. In fact, a turning point really came when Walter Cronkite, a very respected television news anchor, visited Vietnam during the Tet Offensive, and he questioned whether or not this war could be won. And this made many Americans further question whether or not we were fighting a losing battle. And so at this point in time, U.S. support for the war effort really begins to slip dramatically. Also, during Vietnam, we experienced the first draft since the Korean War, and many Americans protested going. Some protesters burned their draft cards. 50,000 marched on the Pentagon, and 70,000 fled to Canada and other countries to avoid service. So this leads to Lyndon Johnson announcing in March of 1968 that he would not accept nor would he seek re-election. In fact, he announces he wouldn't accept the Democratic Party's nomination for president, which is unusual. Usually a sitting president who is eligible to run for another term will run for another term, but he's actually facing challenges. His own vice president, Herbert Humphrey, is criticizing him. He's becoming a vocal critic and is challenging him for the Democratic Party's nomination. Bobby Kennedy announces that he's going to campaign and challenge LBJ. So in March, LBJ really realizes that he's lost the confidence of the American people and announces that he will not run. So, once again, as I mentioned, Vice President Humphrey, he opposes Johnson's wartime policies. He's a critic. On the Republican side of the aisle, Richard Nixon says that he will end the war.